Have you ever wondered why someone who walked away suddenly comes back into your life? Why, after silence, absence, or even rejection, that same person reaches out again? At first, it feels confusing. You might ask yourself, if I wasn't enough before, why now? But the truth is, their return is rarely about you being enough. It's about what silence does, what distance reveals, and what the human heart begins to recognize when it no longer has constant access to you. We live in a world where people often don't value what's always available. When something or someone is consistently present, it's easy to overlook their importance. The moment that presence is gone, suddenly the absence speaks louder than the person ever did. This is the power of no contact. It's not about games and it's not about manipulation. It's about space. And space creates clarity. Why do men return after no contact? Let's break this down. First, silence forces reflection. When you step back, you remove the noise without your voice, your energy, or your constant presence. He starts to notice the void. That absence makes him reflect on what he had, what he lost, and whether it mattered more than he realized. Second, distance changes perspective. Think about it. When you're too close to something, you can't see the full picture. But the moment you take a step back, things become clear. Many times men don't fully understand the value of a relationship until they view it from the outside. No contact provides that lens. Third, scarcity creates value. It's a principle of human behavior. When something is abundant, it feels ordinary. But when it becomes rare or completely unavailable, it becomes precious. By removing yourself, you unintentionally increase your worth in his eyes. He begins to remember your kindness, your strength, your presence, not as ordinary, but as extraordinary. Fourth, no contact shifts the power dynamic. When you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop waiting, you take back your power. And men notice. That shift makes them reconsider what role they played in losing someone who now looks stronger, more independent, and more grounded without them. And finally, absence awakens longing. Memory has a way of romanticizing the past. When you are no longer there, he doesn't remember the small arguments or the moments of distance. He remembers the way you made him feel, the comfort of your presence, the warmth of your laughter. That longing becomes the magnet that pulls him back. But here's the truth you must never forget. His return is not the point. His absence taught you something far greater, that your value does not depend on his recognition, that silence is powerful, that your peace is priceless, and that you don't need someone to return to prove your worth. So, when a man comes back after no contact, don't just ask, why did he return? Ask instead, do I still want what I had before he left? Because sometimes, the most powerful decision is not welcoming someone back, but realizing you've already moved forward. When someone chooses to walk away, or when circumstances create distance, silence begins to take over. Silence is powerful because it creates a vacuum, and in that vacuum, awareness begins to grow. Most people don't realize the value of what they have when it is constantly within reach. As long as you were present, available, answering messages, showing care, and filling space with your energy, it was easy for him to take it all for granted. Human beings are wired this way. When something is always there, the mind begins to treat it as normal, as ordinary, and even invisible. That is why silence can be more impactful than words. It interrupts that pattern of assumption. It interrupts the comfort of your presence. And it forces the other person to sit with what they are missing. Think about how noise surrounds us daily. We become so used to the hum of life, the sound of traffic, the endless notifications, the presence of people, that we stop noticing it. But if you remove that sound, suddenly the quiet feels loud. It is unsettling at first, but then it draws attention to what is no longer there. This is exactly what happens in relationships when you step back. The silence becomes a mirror reflecting not just your absence, but the reality of what he once had and now no longer feels entitled to. That absence brings clarity in a way that constant presence never could. In the silence, questions start to surface. He might wonder why you are no longer reaching out. He might question whether you've moved on or found peace without him. He might begin to replay moments, words, and choices that led to this space. This reflection doesn't come when everything is easy and accessible. It comes when silence interrupts the pattern of comfort. Suddenly, he is left with himself and the reality of the gap that your presence once filled. Awareness is rarely immediate. It creeps in slowly. At first, he may brush it off, thinking he doesn't need you or that life will move on just as easily without your presence. But over time, that silence becomes heavier. The mind begins to wander, to replay memories, to compare new experiences with the old ones, and to question decisions. It is in this quiet space that the truth of what you brought into his life becomes more visible. Silence doesn't erase your importance. It highlights it. The irony is that silence says what words could never fully express. You don't need to explain your worth when your absence is proving it for you. Every unanswered message, every day without contact, every moment of stillness is like a gentle reminder that your presence was never guaranteed. It was a gift. And gifts once taken for granted become more valuable when they are no longer offered freely. This is why silence is not a game but a form of strength. It's not about punishing someone or trying to manipulate their emotions. It's about allowing reality to unfold without interference. By stepping back, you create the conditions where true awareness can arise. He begins to notice the energy shift, the change in dynamic, and the contrast between life with you and life without you. That contrast is powerful because it brings into focus the very things that once blended into the background. Over time, the silence reshapes the narrative. What was once dismissed now feels important. What was once ignored now feels irreplaceable. And what was once overlooked now begins to shine more brightly. Awareness is the first step toward realization, and realization is often what brings someone back. Without silence, there is no awareness. Without awareness, there is no reflection. And without reflection, the value of what you offered remains hidden under the weight of familiarity. So silence, though often misunderstood as emptiness, is anything but empty. It is full of meaning, full of reflection, and full of lessons waiting to be understood. It is the quiet teacher that reveals truths words cannot convey. It forces him to see not what you said, but what you represented. Not what you gave, but what he lost. And not just who you were, but the void that only you could fill. And in that awareness, the possibility of return begins to take root. Not because you asked for it, but because silence made him realize it on his own. When two people are deeply connected, closeness can sometimes blur clarity. Being constantly around someone means every little habit, every flaw, and every minor conflict feels magnified. In that nearness, it becomes difficult to step back and see the bigger picture. This is why distance becomes so powerful. It provides a vantage point, a way of seeing what was once overlooked. Men often realize the true weight of a relationship only when they are given space away from it. Because perspective rarely develops in the middle of constant interaction. It comes when silence and distance create the room to reflect. Imagine standing too close to a painting. From that distance, you only notice the brushstrokes, the imperfections in texture, or the colors that don't seem to blend perfectly. But when you step back, the full image comes alive. The very strokes that look like flaws now form a masterpiece. Relationships work in the same way. While he was close to you, he might have focused on the disagreements, the pressures, or the small imperfections. In his mind, those details felt large, perhaps even overwhelming. But with distance, those moments shrink in size, and what comes into focus is the larger picture, the way you made him feel safe, the way you brought joy into his days, the way your presence steadied his world. Perspective changes because time and space reshape memory. When a man is with you constantly, he may not appreciate the small acts of kindness you offer, the emotional support you provide, or the comfort of simply having someone to share his thoughts with. Familiarity makes those things invisible, but when distance removes them, suddenly they stand out. He begins to notice the difference between life with your influence and life without it. That difference is not always obvious at first, but slowly it becomes undeniable. Distance also strips away the emotional noise of arguments or tension. When people are close, every disagreement feels heavy, every word carries weight, and emotions cloud judgment. But once there is space, those conflicts begin to fade in intensity. What remains is the essence of the relationship. The warmth, the companionship, the shared memories. Distance acts like a filter, removing the temporary distractions and leaving behind the truth of what mattered most. In that truth, he begins to see more clearly not just who you were, but the role you played in his growth, his comfort, and his life as a whole. Another important shift that happens with perspective is the recognition of uniqueness. While he was with you, he may have assumed that the qualities you brought into the relationship could easily be found elsewhere. But distance reveals how rare those qualities truly are. He might spend time with other people, explore new experiences, and try to fill the space, only to realize that what you offered was not common. Perspective shows him that your patience, your energy, or the way you supported him was not ordinary, it was special. This realization rarely comes in the moment of closeness. It is born out of comparison, out of experiencing life without the steady presence you once provided. Distance also shifts priorities. In the middle of a relationship, men can be distracted by external pressures, career goals, social life, personal challenges that cause them to lose sight of the importance of the relationship itself. With space, those distractions remain, but the absence of your presence highlights what truly matters. Perspective allows him to see that while jobs, ambitions, and friends are important, the depth of connection you brought added a kind of fulfillment those things cannot replace. Most importantly, distance helps him recognize his own responsibility. When you are close, it's easy for him to place blame outward, to think the problem lies with the relationship or with you. But when there is no contact, the silence turns inward. He begins to evaluate his own role, his choices, his decisions, and how they contributed to the loss of connection. That self-reflection is a powerful outcome of distance because it doesn't just make him miss you, it makes him consider how he might need to change in order to have you back. Perspective is often the very reason men return. Not because you reminded them, not because you begged or convinced them, but because distance gave them the clarity they couldn't find up close. It is the simple truth that when something is gone, the mind sees it more clearly. Distance is not just physical space, it is the lens that transforms what was once ordinary into something extraordinary, and what was once overlooked into something deeply valued. Human behavior is often guided by the principle of scarcity. What is readily available is seen as ordinary, and what is scarce is seen as valuable. This is not just true for material things, but for relationships and human connection as well. When someone has constant access to you, your attention, your care, your energy, they may unconsciously begin to take it for granted. The availability creates an illusion that it will always be there no matter what choices they make. But when you step back, when you withhold that access through no contact, everything changes. What was once assumed as permanent suddenly feels rare, and with rarity comes value. Consider the way people treat resources in daily life. If water flows endlessly from a tap, few stop to think about its worth. But when that same water becomes scarce, every drop feels precious. The same applies to your presence in someone's life. When you are always reachable, your messages, your support, and your time seemed abundant. He may not have stopped to think about how much effort, love, and energy you are offering. But the moment you step away, he realizes that what once seemed endless can in fact be withdrawn. That realization alone changes the way he perceives your worth. Scarcity also creates urgency. When something feels abundant, people feel no rush to appreciate it. They believe it will still be there tomorrow, next week, or even next year, but when it is no longer within reach, the urgency to hold on to it or regain it grows stronger. Your absence triggers that urgency because it reminds him that access to you is not guaranteed. And once something is no longer guaranteed, the mind begins to crave it more. There is also a psychological effect at play here. The human mind tends to assign more value to things that are harder to obtain. When you were giving freely, the value was masked by its abundance. But when your attention and presence become scarce, he has to work harder, even if only emotionally, to regain them. That extra effort makes him perceive you as more valuable than he did before. The shift is not because you changed, but because scarcity changed the way he experiences your presence. Scarcity also has a way of amplifying memory. When someone cannot have you, they begin to idealize the times when they did. The little things that went unnoticed before suddenly take center stage in their mind. The way you listened to him, the way you made him feel understood, the way your energy filled a room, those memories become sharper and more significant in your absence. Scarcity intensifies those reflections, because the mind is wired to focus on what it cannot currently access. This principle is why people often long for things they once dismissed. When you were present, he might have focused on flaws, conflicts, or distractions. But when you step away, those negatives fade, and what remains are the highlights. Scarcity doesn't just make him miss you, it reshapes the way he remembers you. It elevates the good and downplays the trivial, reminding him of the depth and uniqueness of your presence. Another effect of scarcity is that it places you in a position of strength. By not making yourself readily available, you set boundaries that communicate your worth without words. You are no longer the person who is always waiting, always responding, always accessible. Instead, you become someone whose time, attention, and presence must be valued, respected, and earned. That silent shift changes the entire dynamic, often leaving him more aware of his own actions and more careful about how he approaches you if he chooses to return. Scarcity also forces him to face the reality that losing you is a possibility. As long as you are present, he can afford to believe that nothing will truly change. But when you pull back, the possibility of losing you becomes real, and with that possibility comes the fear of regret. Regret is a powerful motivator. It makes him question whether letting go of someone as rare as you was a mistake, and whether he should take action to correct it before it is too late. The beauty of scarcity is that it reveals value without you needing to say a single word. You do not have to convince him of your worth, because your absence does it for you. You do not have to explain what you offered, because the gap you left makes it clear. Scarcity transforms what was once ordinary into something extraordinary, and in doing so, it changes how deeply he feels your loss and how strongly he desires your return. When two people are in a relationship, the balance of energy often determines how that relationship feels. If one person is always the one reaching out, explaining themselves and fighting to be understood, while the other simply receives, the balance tips. Over time, that imbalance can make the giver feel drained and the receiver feel entitled. When you decide to stop chasing and stop making yourself constantly available through no contact, the dynamic shifts in a profound way. Suddenly, the person who was once comfortable no longer feels the same control, and the strength you gain from pulling back becomes undeniable. Power in relationships is not about dominance, but about respect. It is about whether both people recognize and value each other equally. When you are always the one explaining, apologizing, or trying to fix things, you unintentionally communicated that he had the upper hand. He may not have even realized it, but the dynamic allowed him to feel secure without putting in equal effort. The moment you stopped, the dynamic flipped. Silence replaced explanations, distance replaced pursuit, and calm strength replaced pleading. This quiet shift in behavior communicates more than any argument ever could. The absence of chasing forces him to feel the weight of responsibility. When you stop reaching out, he must decide if he wants to step forward. That is no longer your burden to carry. By doing nothing, you shift the responsibility back where it belongs. If he values the connection, he will feel compelled to act. If he doesn't, then your silence has saved you from investing energy into someone unwilling to meet you halfway. Either way, you stand stronger. This shift also breaks patterns. Every relationship creates unspoken routines. How often you talk, who usually initiates, who usually apologizes. These patterns can be hard to break, but no contact disrupts them immediately. When you no longer follow the old script, he cannot predict your behavior. That unpredictability makes him reassess his role, his choices, and his feelings. The power lies not in punishing him with silence, but in demonstrating that you are no longer bound to a pattern that diminished your worth. The newfound strength you show through no contact often surprises him. He may have believed you would always be there, no matter how things unfolded. Seeing you stand firm, watching you reclaim your time and energy challenges that belief. It makes him see you differently, not as someone dependent on his attention, but as someone whole without it. That realization can be both unsettling and attractive, because strength is magnetic. People are drawn to those who value themselves. Another important part of the shift is how it changes your own mindset. No contact is not just about what it does to him, but about what it gives back to you. The space allows you to focus on yourself, to regain your confidence, and to remind yourself of your value outside of the relationship. This inner transformation radiates outward. When he sees you no longer trying to prove yourself, he begins to wonder why. That curiosity often sparks deeper reflection in him, because it signals that the balance of power has changed. In many ways, the shift in power is less about taking control and more about reclaiming balance. When you stop doing the work for both people, you force him to decide whether he will rise to the level of effort required to maintain a connection. That decision becomes his to make, not yours to carry. And in the process, you protect yourself from being caught in a cycle where you give endlessly without receiving in return. This shift also creates respect. People respect what they cannot easily control. By holding your ground and not rushing to close the gap, you show that you value yourself enough to wait for what you deserve. That quiet confidence demands a different response from him. If he chooses to come back, it will be with greater awareness that your presence is not something to be taken lightly. And if he doesn't, you still stand taller because you have reclaimed your sense of power and dignity. In the end, no contact changes the dynamic, not by force, but by silence. It removes the imbalance, ends the cycle of pursuit, and places you in a position where your worth speaks for itself. The power is not in making him come back, but in showing that you no longer need him to validate your value. That shift is what compels him to rethink his choices and often what makes him return. Not because you asked, but because you stopped asking altogether. When someone is no longer present in your life, memory begins to play a powerful role. The mind has a tendency to soften sharp edges, to filter out the noise of conflict and to elevate the moments that carried meaning. This is why absence often awakens longing. It is not always the person themselves that is missed, but the feeling they created, the comfort they gave, and the unique way they made life feel fuller. When you remove yourself from constant availability, the memory of who you were and how you made him feel takes on a stronger presence than your actual words or actions ever could. In the beginning, he may not notice it. Life moves forward, distractions are plenty, and the absence feels manageable. But with time, little reminders begin to appear. A place you both visited, a song you once shared, or even the quiet moments at the end of the day when he feels the emptiness where your presence used to be. These reminders are not forced, they come naturally. And when they do, they stir feelings of nostalgia, of warmth, and of regret. This is the power of absence. It allows space for longing to surface in ways it cannot when you are still present and accessible. Longing has a way of reshaping memory. Arguments that once felt significant fade into the background, but laughter, comfort, and kindness grow larger in his mind. Human nature tends to remember the emotional impact of a connection rather than the details of conflict. That is why someone who leaves can suddenly feel the pull to return, not because they forget the challenges, but because the good outweighs them in memory. The absence amplifies this imbalance by giving more weight to the positive than the negative. Absence also awakens appreciation. What he once overlooked begins to stand out. The way you listened without judgment, the way you supported his dreams, or the way you brought calm to his storms, all of these qualities become clearer in your absence. When you were present, they blended into daily life.